Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart on the Awesome Health Podcast from Bioptimizers. And I'm excited today. I'm super excited today because we have a special guest, a blast from the past that's doing some really cool things in the current world. Our guest today is Tom Terwilliger. Did I say that right? I can't
Very
get that
good,
right.
actually, Wade.
Thank you. I'm always conscientious of how I pronounce things, but here's a really interesting part. I first got exposed to Tom when I was a young bodybuilder. Tom, of course, built a name for himself as a Mr. America and a Mr. Olympia competitor, which is kind of like the Super Bowl of bodybuilding. He then transferred that into a career as a trainer and coach, like a whole lot of people. He's going to talk about some of the famous people that he dealt with. And then he went on and transformed himself into like working with Harv Eker, which I've had exposure to that. And now as at an age where a lot of people are kind of winding down and falling apart, and looking for the exit out of life or trying to squeeze out the last few years, you are not only a physical specimen, you look fantastic as you have throughout your whole life. It's amazing. You live this crazy life, reinvented yourself several different times, and now you're talking about your new program, your new book called The 7-Step Comeback. Tom, welcome to the show.
I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be here, man. The first time we met at Traffic and Conversion a couple of years ago. And number one, I was so impressed with your product line, I mean, that's the first thing, because number one, it was really just starting to emerge, this whole gut health and the microbiome health. And you guys have really, challenged yourselves to step up in terms of the product line, in terms of what you're doing, how you disseminate the information. And you're certainly at the forefront of this. So having met you at Traffic and Conversion, and then ultimately putting the pieces together in terms of where we have some relationship in the bodybuilding world was a delight for me. And so I was equally as delighted to have you invite me on as a guest, and I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming here as well. And it's so much fun as the more I dive into it, like the historical. But for those who don't know Tom or haven't heard of Tom, maybe you can give a synopsis of kind of like the early years. How did you get into the sport of bodybuilding? What was that like, coming up and becoming a professional, which is, I don't think a lot of people really can comprehend how much self-discipline and determination that it takes to become a good bodybuilder, a national level bodybuilder, let alone a professional bodybuilder and someone who's competed with literally the very, very elitist, best in the world, 1 in a billion type bodies. What does that, like, how did you end up in this crazy, I always say it's the craziest sport ever. How did you end up in that? What drove you to that? How did that happen?
It is a crazy sport. By the way, when you say those things, it's just like, I'm like, who is this guy he's talking about? It's interesting how we live our lives and we evolve in certain ways. We don't necessarily recognize it as an evolution or a pivot or a change in any way, shape, or form, or a reinvention. It's just our lives to a degree, right? And if you start out with any level of, or develop any level of ambition, desire, and belief in yourself, you continue to evolve. And you had mentioned, I'm at an age now, 61, where most people are pretty much winding down. And I think that's a mistake. I'm asked frequently, how old are you, man? And my answer is, my age is none of my business. I don't care to know. I don't want to know. You know what I mean? It's just like, I just want to know what I can and can't do at this point. And I'll find that out through the process of trying. So yeah, that's a very good question. How did I get involved in this? I guess what most people would consider a crazy sport. In fact, my parents, when I first got involved in bodybuilding, thought it was a little crazy. Even though my older brother Raymond was working out, he was a New York City police officer, and he got all the looks and stature. He was 6'2", big, kind of muscular guy, great guy. And he was working out, but he wasn't bodybuilding per se. He didn't have any interest in the sport per se, So when I first introduced the idea to my parents, they're like dumbfounded because they'd never heard of such a thing. It's like, why, what, But then as they began to see what it required, what it was taking, how it was pulling me away from a not so good path, and what it was doing for my self-esteem and my discipline, then they began to really support it. They said, hey, this really is a sport. This really is a good activity for a young man, for a young teenager, you know? But I got into it sort of almost inadvertently. And it started, my story starts sort of like in 4th grade, because I had dyslexia. I had hyperactivity, they called it then. Now it would be, you know, attention deficit, of course. And it was pretty severe for the most part. And I was acting out. I was either the comic or fighting constantly. So I was put into the special ed class. And as you can imagine, you know, someone putting you into the special ed class, it becomes a bit of a stigma, you might say. It's almost a black, you know, mark on the rest of your life in many respects, you know. But certainly then in the 4th, 5th, 6th grade or so, you become an outcast. You become, you know, you're not really one of the regular kids anymore. You even have a special bus that you go back and forth from school in, you know?
It's really weird, that segregation, isn't it? It's you know, it's kind of back now. It's like I look at that and I go, wow, that's just really weird.
Yes. I don't know if it's still, again, I don't know if it's still happening in that respect. I'm sure to some degree it is. But again, you know, kids, when kids don't understand something, or they see something that's different, or someone different than them, they tend to get defensive inside and rebel out and poke fun at or tease or even bully for the most part. So that's what I was part of early on. And I rebelled against it, you might say, not necessarily being there, being part of that tribe, but rebelled against what was happening outside in terms of the bullying. And my brother and I at that time were already studying. We started early on, about 8 years old, studying Chinese Kung Fu. And so we were pretty tough already, you know? So we got into this thing where we're just like, no one's going to bully us, and no one's going to bully us in our class. So we became the bully killers, you might say. And we rounded up a couple other kids, and we became this like little gang, the Savage Skulls. And we were pretty tough guys. I mean, you know, you saw the Savage Skulls walking down the street, you got on the other side of the street, man.
Right.
We were never bullies. Again, our objective was to prevent bullying. That was really, we unconsciously, we didn't state it. It wasn't part of our mission statement, you know, at 10 years old or whatever it was. You know, it was just part of what we did. We didn't need any other excuse to fight except to protect others that were being bullied, that were in the special ed class. So all that being said, the Kung Fu process, what I was learning, you know, evolved into seeing my first Bruce Lee movie. It was in Chinatown in Manhattan. I think it was called The Big Boss.
Right.
And it had, you know, it was still in Chinese. It was all, you know, subtitled. Oh, man.
You know, I just love the dubbing.
Oh, the dubbing. It didn't match in the least bit, right? But I'm telling you, the impact that had, not only on my Kung Fu practices, but this desire to get more muscle, because my brother and I were really skinny kids. We were just, you know, toothpicks, you know? And so this desire to get like Bruce Lee with the lats and the abs and just like, so I started when my brother started teaching us how to work out. One thing led to another. I joined a gym. I guess I was about 14 years old when I first joined a gym in Massapequa, Long Island, where I grew up. And then I heard about this other gym that was down the street. And this other gym, in fact, I've been told about Future Man Gym, just only been open for about a year or so, man. But you don't want to go there. Those guys will chew you up and spit you out. You do not want to go in there. So I remember one day I went there, and it was like late in the evening. I rode my bicycle up to Future Man in Amityville. You know the Amityville Horror. Right. This was the original Amityville Horror.
It's crazy.
So I ride my bicycle there, and I remember I had to like wipe the windows to steam. There was so much steam on the window. I was like trying to look in. I must have been out there for about an hour and a half before I could get the guts to step through that door, because you could hear it in there. You could hear the yelling. You could hear the weights clanging and the people coaching and the whole thing going on. And I was like, oh my God, I'm up this skinny 14-year-old kid, you know? So I open the door, I walk in, and the first thing that hits me like a ton of bricks, it's like a wall, was the pungent smell of the place.
Right.
It was a combination between sweat, vomit, and Bengay. And to this day, if I catch anything that's remotely that aroma, I'm drawn to it. I'm like, where's that coming from? Yeah. So one thing leads to another. I see a guy, Steve Mahalik, working out in there, and he was a Mr. America training for the Mr. Universe competition. And of course, my young mind, I couldn't even comprehend what I was seeing. I couldn't comprehend it. You know, how could a human being look that way? How could they create that? And you know what, Wade, what's interesting is when I look back at that, understanding the power of that question in itself, it can't be underestimated. I didn't run out of the gym, go back to the other gym and do my 5-pound curls. I didn't say that's impossible and run out.
Right.
Had I gone in there 20, 30 years later, I might have had all the limitations that would have not even given me the opportunity to see if it was possible or not. But to ask myself how, and that's the key. And that's one of the mindset keys that I took into the bodybuilding world and take into what I'm doing today, is always asking how, having a beginner's mindset, you might say. So that question set me up for the answer. I took all my money. I mean, I lived penny in my jar, my piggy bank, all the stuff, you know what I mean? My allowance. I went there and I joined up. I had enough for about 1 month, right? Barely. I mean, the guy's counting pennies. You know, it's like my membership. And he said, "You sure it's okay with your parents? I think you have to have a signature from your parents." I'm fine. No. You let me in. And I had just enough for the month, and I started training there. And that really turned into my love, because there, not only was Steve Mahalik, Tony Padalfo, all these guys that were really great bodybuilders at the time. That's where it was the East Coast Mecca. I didn't know that at the time, but I came to learn that it was the East Coast Mecca, where everybody and anybody who was good, wanted to be good, was training at Future Man Gym. And so it was a great place to get my start and to really fall in love with the sport, you might say, and the people, especially at that time, who were engaged in it.
That's a beautiful story, and it's so funny when you talk about the smell of the place, and I can think of a couple of the great gyms that I train in. Now that I live in Venice, of course, I'm during lockdown, I'm over here in Arizona because I need to get out of California.
Oh, you are? You're in Arizona. Good for you.
Yeah. So, but when even today, when you walk into Gold's Gym, and there's no, to me, it's the throwback to what the gyms used to be like. It's changed a lot now, but there's still people walking around. And the one thing I miss the most, you know what I miss the most about the gyms?
What's that?
The clang of the iron plates. They're now all coated. There was this, like a guy doing a set of squats, and that jing, jing, jing. It was kind of like a jingle. It's a totally unique sound.
Because even then, no one put clamps on the bar back then.
No.
The weights rattling around.
Yeah. You know, I heard Tom Platz talking about that as well at another occasion. He's got a million stories that are awesome. I'll tell
you what, to jump off there, because that first day when I worked in the Future Man Gym, I told you there was a guy. At first I was standing there like frozen. I mean, the machines, the smell, the sound, the skinniest guy in the gym intimidated me. I mean, it was like I was intimidated. And over in the corner, I remember turning my head abruptly because there was a ruckus going on over in the corner, what they called that. Then I discovered was the leg area, the leg extension, the squats, the leg press. And just putting back onto the rack, somebody's screaming at him. He's screaming, puts it back on the rack, about 500, 550 pounds. Exactly what you're talking about. Those big old iron plates were about 3 inches thick, and they just like rattling because they're all a little bit loose. Racks up his 500 pounds, and there he is. That Steve Mahalik comes out from under that bar, and I was like, oh my God. But the sound, it will always be, you're absolutely right. The plastic rubber-coated weights, you can't recapture that experience. You can't.
Yeah, really, really powerful in those places. So how did you go from there to being a professional bodybuilder, which I have so much respect for that, because, I know when I had the opportunity to compete at the Mr. Universe contest, and when I went there, I remember being in the room, and there's 100 different languages.
Yeah.
And I was good enough to be in the room, but not good enough, I'd say, to get out of the room.
Not the way you wanted to. Anyway.
So the beauty of that was I got to understand what world class looks like. And when you get to world class, your drive, your discipline, you do need the genetics in order to get to a certain space. That's for certain. But I remember getting there and going, wow, I earned my spot to be in this room. And there was an instant respect, because I thought, for me, it took me 16 years to get there. how many people, like I knew what everybody in that gym had really gone through to get there. And I had just mad levels of respect. You went beyond that a couple of notches to the Super Bowl of Mr. Olympia. What was that journey like, and what did you learn along the way?
Oh, there were so many lessons. But, you know, like you, Wade, in many respects, and getting to the universe is no small feat, man. Earning your stripes to get into that room, that pump-up room, and be one of the competitors at the Mr. Universe competition is pretty darn extraordinary. I mean, I would say it really rivals anything that I did. And with all respect, just getting there, you don't have to win. Because I felt the same way when I got to the Mr. Olympia competition, as you call it, the Super Bowl. And it truly is. I felt, in many respects, my first time I got to compete there twice didn't make the top 10, which was not necessarily, it wasn't disappointing the first time. It was a little disappointing the second time. Mm-hmm. But the first time competing there, it was like, I felt like I had earned my stripes. I had earned my right to be there. It was part of who I was. I certainly felt like I could compete. I never had an illusion at that moment of winning it. But I also had this strong, overwhelming, like incredibly invigorating feeling like I was still that 15-year-old kid walking into, you know, Future Man Gym and seeing this guy for the first time. And now suddenly that guy is me. And I'm looking around, you've got Albert Beckles, you got Robbie Robinson, you got Lee Haney, you've got Rich Gaspari, you've got Mike Christian, you got all these guys that just was like I either came up with or admired coming up, that I'm in the room with. And I literally, I can remember a very distinct moment where I just stopped and took it in.
That's
and
beautiful.
This is a powerful lesson. It was a powerful lesson for me, and I think for anyone and anyone who, regardless of whether your attempt at something, if you give everything you've got and you're balls to the walls and you hold nothing back, and you wind up there where you wanted to be, whether it's in business or relationship, and maybe it doesn't work out the way we want it. Maybe you don't place in the top 5. Maybe you don't win. Maybe you're dead last. But there has to be a time and a moment of anchoring the experience of being there and knowing what you did, what you had to do, what you had to overcome, and the challenges you stepped up to meet just to get there. And I remember for me, that distinct moment at the Mr. Olympia competition, backstage during that pump up process, you know, and I was pumping up, and I was using one of the mirrors, and I'm looking, I'm, you know, tanning, and all of a sudden Robbie Robinson's standing next to me, and I'm like, I was like, holy crap. And I anchored it. I anchored it as something. And again, I'm telling you, the power of anchoring that kind of experience, whatever that experience is for you, anchoring that experience so that you can call upon it later on, because there will be more to do, more to accomplish. This is why today at 61 years old, I'm still looking to do more, wanting to do more, serving more. In many respects, because I have that anchor, and I want to continue to experience those new things that vibrate at such a high frequency. So anchor, no matter what. And I tell you, it saddens me in many respects when I see competitors, no matter where. I mean, I remember Ronda Rousey, when she lost her fight at the UFC and was distraught about it and whined about it. It was just like, Ronda, you are not doing yourself any kind of service in terms of winning that next battle. You've got another battle coming up. You don't anchor that loss in so deep, so emotionally that you can't let go of it, that every punch you throw, that's where it's coming from. No. You got to anchor the experience of being there and saying, okay, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? What can we do better the next time? Debriefing in that way. So for me, Wade, that experience of being at the Olympia, like you at the Universe, I was still that 16-year-old kid. I earned my right, but I was still that 16-year-old kid, man, that 15-year-old kid. And it was just like, wow, I'm here. I made it. The story, the process of getting there was undulating, to say the least, you know? And again, like yourself, it took me about 15, 16 years to get to that level, you know?
Funny you should say that, because I can remember standing backstage at the Mr. Universe, and they were calling out the names of the countries. And it took me to Pumping Iron, because we all watch Pumping Iron, when they're calling out, okay, you know, Brazil and the cook, you know, Canada, where's Canada? You know, and it sounded, I swear to God.
Nobody knows where Canada is.
I swear to God, it was the same guy that was doing it in Pumping Iron that was doing it when I went like the 25 years later or whatever.
It's like Albert Busek or something.
Yeah. And I was like, is this for real? Like it felt like I stepped into the movie for a moment.
Right.
The visualization, and it's cool that you've taken the time to anchor it, which leads me to, and we're going to go there in a second, because I think there's a lot of NLP stuff. I've studied NLP. I know you've done a lot of NLP, but that undulating journey, I think that any road to success in any discipline or any sport, and just to put things in perspective for our listeners, I think there's been 15 guys who have won the Mr. Olympia since its inception in 1965. That's how exclusive that club is. It might be the most exclusive sports club in the world.
I think it could be.
When you talk about that undulating road, that you have a dream, you have a goal, you have a vision for yourself, and you invariably come up against obstacles. And those obstacles can be external, and those obstacles can be internal. What were some of the obstacles that you came up with? And then how did you find it within yourself to overcome it? Because most times when people hit an obstacle, that's it. They cave, they fold, they don't come back, they don't know what to do. Because oftentimes when you're in one of those, you really don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Like, it's really like when it's an obstacle, I'm not talking about, hey, things didn't work out this week. It's a financial, it's physical, it's emotional, it's a relationship. Like, bad things happen to good people of all sorts. What were some of those things for you? And then where did you find the strength to kind of?
Well, I'll tell you, it was a very good question, by the way, and a great observation, because that's exactly how it is. It's not always, the foreseen or even the unforeseen, or we may come up against something that maybe we can handle on our own. Maybe we can't change on our own. This is why no man is a rock, no man is an island. We all have to be able to reach out for those resources, I think, personally, I think that the greatest obstacle any one of us can run into along the way is our own self-doubt, our own insecurities in many respects. They're the ones that will place those obstacles on our path. And in many respects, that's what happened to me along the way. One of the reasons I retired, and I'll share that story in a bit, because my unconscious mind, somewhere, either a doubt or an uncertainty along the way, created a physical manifestation that literally took me out of the sport. And we'll talk about that. But for me, early on, having built a foundation early on, and I was very, very fortunate that I had a mentor early on. I had two mentors, Tony Pandolfo, the guy who owned that Future Man gym, who was also a great champion bodybuilder himself, only about 5'5", but oh my God, every bit as wide, and just one of the most decent, greatest human beings I've ever met. And another guy who was coaching a lot of young bodybuilders, teenagers at the time, Bob Gruskin. And Bob Gruskin had he mentored and coached more champion bodies, more Mr. Americas than anyone. I mean, he may be the greatest coach in any sport that ever lived, because no one has ever had that many champions from a different, not just like, okay, I got this one guy, he wins the Olympia 7 times. No, I've got 10, 15, 20 guys, and 75% of them go on and win the Mr. America or the Mr. Universe. I mean, it's extraordinary. So I was very fortunate that Bob Gruskin in my corner in that respect. And he taught me a lesson very early on, because as a teenager, I was doing pretty well. I won the Teenage Metropolitan, the Colonial America, the Teenage America, and I might have been getting a little cocky even. It's possible. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't recognize it in yourself per se, but I'm sure he did. And so he talked me into going to a contest in Connecticut that was already below what I'd been competing in. I said, you're ready. You're ready. You need to go. You need to go. There's not going to be anybody there. You just, let's go. Yeah, I'm going out to do photographs. Why don't you enter? We can get some good photographs, right? So I said, okay, I enter. So I get there and I get my ass handed to me. I mean, it was one of the most humiliating competition experiences I've ever had, because I wasn't tan enough. My hair was too long. I wasn't in shape, and I got crushed. And I didn't want to go back, because for those who aren't familiar with bodybuilding, this is what's called the pre-judging, which is the judges get together, they line everybody up in particular weight classes or height classes, and then they judge them and separate them and compare them several times. It's quite a process, and it's exhausting, as you know, Wade. It can be pretty
killer. People don't realize how tough that really is. It's tough.
Because even when you're not being called out and doing this, you're still standing in the back, and you're you're tense. You're holding your body the whole time, you know? And I remember I didn't get called out once for the prejudging. And so I did not want to go back for the night show, which is the presentation part of the show. And Bob and my dad, who was there, talked me into going back. And I tell you what, man, it was, I still get a little, emotional about it, because it was like such a powerful lesson in sportsmanship. You signed up for it. You came here. You did the prejudging. You don't quit halfway through. You go home. You get up there. You suck it up, and you take your comeuppance. If you lost the match, you lost the match. You don't quit. So and it wasn't even that way. They made it my choice, but they, framed it in such a way that I had no choice. I had to go back, and it was such a powerful lesson that it helped me later on, because I think Bob knew, and I certainly learned along the way, that if you haven't lost, if you don't know how to lose, if you don't know how to lose and come back from it, pick yourself back up again, there's a very slim chance that you'll ever become a champion, whatever you want to do, whatever it is that you want to achieve in your life. You have to be knocked down, kicked around a little bit, and then come back. And then you've got the wherewithal, if you come back, to be able to achieve what you wanted to achieve and then some. So that lesson was one of those things. And certainly it was, I didn't want to go back into the gym. I didn't want to train. It didn't take long, though, after that competition. It took about a month and a half or so to be like, okay, let's go. Time to pick myself up and get back in there.
You bring up such a good point. I remember talking to my old coach. I tried to do it my own way for 10 years and got my first win after 10 years, but it was stupid. I should have got coaching much sooner because my career accelerated. And my coach, Scott Abel, he coached hundreds of champions, really great guy. And he's a master's in sociology, which is very interesting. He's a very, very bright person. And he was giving a discussion on his boards or something back in the day. And he said, one of the most important things, or one of the most important observational points of champions is in all sports, is the most successful champions are people who have a devastating loss. Like they go to the Super Bowl and lose. They go to the Stanley Cup Finals and lose. They go to the event and they lose. And like you said, they learn the emotional, the physiological, and the mental consequences of losing.
Yeah.
And of course, we live in a world where we don't want losers. Everybody got participation. And we know that the psychology is all in. It actually damages people's self-worth, because there's no benchmark, there's no standards, there's nothing to compare ourselves to. And of course, the Olympic oath is that I salute my competitor, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, because it's the desire to beat that competitor that pushes me past what I think is possible for me. In other words, it's kind of a weird way of leveraging our own egos to get to a point of truly the extraordinary. And once you get there, well, the contest is over. There's no comebacks, I say, in bodybuilding. Like the show goes up, it's over, it's done, right? That's it. All your work is done before that. And I think all your work between anything is oftentimes done in the preparation. So I appreciate the insight about that. So talking about that, what was the action steps that you took? And then where do you think that loss led you later on in your career?
I think it was, instrumental in everything moving forward. But it is fascinating, because I think I competed one more time after that just to kind of prove myself. And it was the Teenage Southern USA. And I got flown and I got sponsored and flown down there. And it was the first time I had competed outside like this tri-state area. You know what I mean? Right. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, that whole thing. And so that was down in Louisiana. It was the first time I'd ever even traveled before. I'd never flown anywhere before. And to go down to Lake Charles, Louisiana, where I couldn't understand a darn word of the English they were speaking down there. I mean, it was so thick. I'm like, what? But then I also had the opportunity to meet Frank Zane while I was down there, because he was guest posing. And I'll never forget, I was out on the beach on Lake Charles in Louisiana. And I'm out there just getting a little bit of sun. I was there a couple of days in advance. And here comes this guy, and I see him walking up, and I'm like, this guy's got a pretty good physique. you know, and sure enough, it's Frank Zane. So I jump up because I loved Frank Zane. I was a big fan. For those of you listening, Frank Zane was a 3-time Mr. Olympia, one of that, you know, that very elite group, you might say. And one of the things that was distinctive about Frank Zane was that he wasn't a mass monster. He wasn't a giant. He wasn't an Arnold Schwarzenegger or even a big, thick Franco Columbu. He was, he never, I don't think he ever competed at over 185 pounds, even though he was about 5'8", but was very lean and shapely. He was the master of aesthetics. And so even early on, I recognized that, hey, I'm never going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm never going to be that big. I'm not 6'2". And so Frank Zane became sort of the idol that I wanted to be like. So meeting him in person and recognizing the guy was so friendly and so helpful and so smart. I could tell just right off the bat, you know what I mean? It was just, and of course I'm a dumbfounded kid. But that experience really enlightened me further. And then winning the Southern USA, it was a great honor. I came back home a champion and decided to take a couple of months off. Those couple of months led to getting my first Harley Davidson. I was a junior in high school, and it was a chopper, and I was the only one in high school with a Harley Davidson chopper. And so I started riding, you know, around Manhattan. Anywhere I saw bikes parked out in front of some bar, I would pull in, hang out. I wasn't even old enough to drink, and I would hang out. And ultimately, I connected with, I guess, what most people, certainly my parents, would consider the wrong crowd.
Right.
And so that 2-month break, or even that 1-month break I thought I was going to take, wound up being about 5 years.
Wow.
And yeah, it was 5 years I took off and got into a lot of trouble, drank a lot of alcohol, did a lot of drugs, rode without. I mean, I embraced the outlaw lifestyle, the clothing, the language, the bikes, the alcohol, the drugs, you name it. You know, I was part of it. The only thing I didn't do was full patch into this particular club that I was riding with. But somewhere along the way, the mentoring, the faith in God, my bodybuilding background began to override that old disempowering belief. And one of the reasons, Wade, and you'll probably recognize it right at the top, is one of the reasons I wound up down that path is because, and I recognize it today, is that I was starting, go back to the beginning of our conversation where I was put into special ed class, and you begin to create these self-doubts about yourself. You're not smart, you're dumb, you don't belong in normal society, you're not one of them, right? Mm-hmm. So all that I started to dismiss all that a little bit as I got into bodybuilding. It was a saving grace for a while. But then as I started to become a champion and I took that loss and came back from it and won the Southern USA, something happened. It was almost like I butted up against the ceiling and it said, wait a second, you're not a champion. You're not that guy. You don't belong in magazines. You're that guy. You're that stupid, dumb retard that I got called several times at that age. You're that guy. And so, boom, I hit that ceiling and I began to manifest that. And as you can imagine, you know, in the special ed class, you feel a little rejected, right? And so I felt pretty much at home with the rest of the rejects on those Harley Davidsons.
100%.
Right?
Totally
so
relate to that.
That's where I felt like I belonged and I felt comfortable there for a while. But then something else started to bubble up about 4 or 5 years into it. I started to wrestle with this idea that maybe I've got more. I do have more. I'm better than this, and I can achieve more. And the other thing that started to change was I began to see what the whole outlaw biker thing was about. And it wasn't about the brotherhood, the camaraderie, the connection, or even the power. It's organized crime. And that wasn't who I was. Mm-hmm. And so as that began to manifest, of course, I had to try and find the guts and the courage to get out. And I couldn't until ultimately I had to take a leap of faith that ultimately got me out of that situation. And the first place I went was back to the gym, man.
Yep.
Boom. Start rebuilding the body, start rebuilding my own self-esteem. And within 2 years or so, bam, it was back to competition with an entirely new mindset and a new belief system along the way. So that was, for me, that was the greatest challenge. It was getting pulled back into that disempowering belief system, however it manifested in terms of that motorcycle club, and then ultimately being able to break free of that was extraordinarily powerful. Yeah.
That's super, super powerful, I think, for people to understand that might be going through a major challenge, whether that's a health crisis, a financial crisis, a personal crisis, or a relationship crisis. So from there, you kind of went on, and was it a straight up run after that into the pro ranks?
Well, yeah, actually it was the three greatest years of my bodybuilding career was training for the national championship.
Yep.
Because I think, you know, as a young kid coming up in the bodybuilding, and I've spoken to several of my contemporaries, John Defendez and Jerry Scalisi and all these other guys, you know, the goal at the time was to win the Mr. America. We wanted to become Mr. America.
Yeah.
And it was like, there was sort of like this.
We had Mr. Canada. I get it. I totally get it.
Mr. Canada.
That's like, how you get the championship. You got to win the national. You got to win the national championship. Right?
Did you win the Canada? Is that how you got to the universe?
Yeah, that's how I won. That's how I got. I get it.
You're the Canadian version of Mr. America. I mean, it's just it's an extraordinary accomplishment. But when you're coming up, that's the goal, right? You want to be like, you got to be there. And so I said,
then you get your pro card.
Oh, you got to get your pro card after that. It's interesting, though, Wade, because my goal is like I never thought about the pro card really. I started thinking about the last. I had to compete in the national championship 3 times before I won it, and that was the 3 years that was the best journey of my life.
Right,
the bodybuilding career. But I never really gave much thought to the pro card thing. I never really gave much thought to becoming a pro. I never really gave much thought to becoming Mr. Olympia or even competing in the Olympia. It was my sights were set on the national championship, winning the Mr. America. And in hindsight, that it got me where I got to, but it may have also been a bit of a mistake. It may have also been a limiting mindset, because after winning the national championship, it's not like I took it easy or backed off. I mean, I trained harder, and I knew this was, hey, I'm going up against the best again, and I got to be at my best. And I trained hard, and I improved. I improved substantially. But it was funny because it was like unconsciously, it wasn't the objective. It was never really the objective.
Right.
So to a degree, I limited myself by shooting for a lesser star, you know, might say. You know what I mean? There's more. And I shot for that. There's something also to be said for, there's what I call the leap continuum. Climb to the highest summit, take the leap, and only from there can you see what the next summit is. And only from there can you see the next summit. So there's that as well. But to go back to the idea that, was it a straight journey or so? It was a fairly tough journey, because the first year at the Nationals, winning, going to the Mr. America, I took 3rd. Extraordinarily encouraging. I almost died in the process. I was so dehydrated. Oh my God. Wait, when I tell you, I mean, I was sitting, it was in Louisiana again, a different area of Louisiana. It was in New Orleans, and it was an outdoor amphitheater, and it was about 110 degrees out.
Oh my God.
And, you know, we're already dehydrated and not drinking enough water or getting enough potassium or anything else. So I remember I was sitting in the stands, and I was all alone, because I was, you know, the guys that were helping me out, I was upset because they just, and again, nobody's a victim. It was my responsibility, but they had me doing some diuretics that I probably shouldn't, and it really messed me up. That morning of the show, I didn't want to get out of bed. It was horrible. It was just terrible. And so I had to blame someone. I blamed them, right? So I'm sitting in the stands, and I'm just like, you know, you're flexing. You know what I mean? You know, this is what we do. We feel our body. We're training for, do we have a pump? Can we get pumped? Do we feel flat? Is the muscle there? Is it not there? And every time I would flex something, it was just like, oh, it was like so I couldn't even like open my hands. My bicep would lock up. Abs were like, just everything was cramping. And so when they said light heavies, time to go backstage and start preparing, I stand up. The minute I stand up, my quadricep completely cramps and locks up. So I bend my leg to try and alleviate it. And then the hamstring locks up. And then the other leg does exactly the same thing. And I go tumbling down 4 flights of stairs in the bandstand, right? So these guys who were supposed to be helping me come running over. They literally pick me up, carry me backstage. I'm seeing everybody else pumping up. JJ Marsh, Rich Gaspari back there, and they're all pumping up and getting ready. And I'm like on a stretcher, you know, I can't even move. So I lay down, I grabbed the guy by the collar who was helping me out. I said, go get me a hot dog and a beer. So he got me a hot dog and a beer, and bam, I downed that quickly, didn't even have time to put oil on, rush out on stage and managed to get past some of the cramps to take 3rd. But it would almost kill me. It literally almost killed me.
Yeah, I can relate to that, boy.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people really don't know how close to the edge bodybuilders actually push themselves in this competition. Of course, we've heard all kinds of horror stories of people that went over the edge.
And we look healthy, we look strong, but we are the last thing from healthy and strong at that moment. It really, in many respects, the sport at its peak, especially for someone who's not doing it right and is sort of following somebody else's game plan.
Correct.
It could cost you your life. It could.
Yeah. Yeah. So you go on from there, you eventually come back, you win the shows, you go on to a pro career, which you were very successful, as I would say, to go out there and pro and make a living and stuff. But then a lot of people don't realize it's not like football or baseball or hockey. There's not a whole lot of money in the sport, but somehow you springboarded that journey.
Yeah, it was.
That range from there to kind of the next level and then beyond.
Yeah, it is interesting because when I look at people that have made those jumps, those leaps, you might say, and it's always fascinating to what did they do? What was the process? What was the mindset going on? And so for me, going back to next year, taking second, finally winning the championship the third year, I knew that I was going to turn pro. And I also wanted, okay, if I'm going to be pro, I want an environment that can really support that. At the same time, I want an environment that supports me financially as well. So it was like a natural spring up. Plus, I always loved gyms, loved being, and we talked about those early experiences. So I began building my own gym. I built a gym in Lynbrook, Long Island, called Maximum Health and Fitness. And that was the year, literally, that was the same year winning the national championship. And so we built that one. And then a year later, we bought a building, which was a mistake. It was an old scuba diving school. So the construction, we should have just tore the building down and started from scratch. It would have been cheaper. The construction to build this athletic club was enormous, but it turned out to be a fantastic place, a great home for my training. And we really developed a community there that I still get Facebook messages. Oh, I remember I trained at your gym and it was either you did this or you encouraged me. So for me, in many respects, it was great having that environment, building something that provided me a livelihood in an environment that I loved and would want it to be at anyway, And of course, as you know, as a business, owner yourself and entrepreneur yourself, there's a big difference between wanting to own a gym and being a professional athlete and actually being a good enough business person to thrive in business.
Right.
So that was one of my greatest lessons along the way. Thank God we opened the first one, which was smaller and the overhead was lower, because I had some real powerful lessons to learn in that respect. It was the only way I was able to have the courage, wherewithal, and the resources to be able to open the second one, which was much, much bigger. But man, there was some powerful lessons in entrepreneurship and business, every bit as powerful and challenging as they were in bodybuilding, for sure. So that was sort of the process from there. So that's how I got into being an entrepreneur. And I developed a bunch of other things, almost always in the fitness and bodybuilding realm. I had something I called My Trainer we were pretty successful with. Remember when we had, what were they called? Walkmans, they put the cassette in. The orange things. I developed a product called My Trainer, and it was you would get a tape, an audio tape every month mailed to you. We advertised in Muscle and Fitness, Flex, and all the top magazines, and you would get it. Me personally walking you through a workout, not just telling you about the workout, but literally, okay, let's go, 3 more, 5 more. Okay, good. Now you're gonna take 30 seconds, take a quick break. If you need to adjust the weight, let's get doing that right now. Grab a quick hit of water, because then you've got now 20 seconds to get back in and do your next set. Are you ready? Let's go. So we created that long before, any of these audios were around. It was on a cassette. So that was reasonably successful for a while. And then I did a bunch of other entrepreneurial things, and one thing led to another. And so that was the entrepreneurial path and how it evolved from the bodybuilding.
There's something and I'd like your opinion on. I think I'd probably know the answer, but that's one thing I noticed with the advent of personal stereo systems when it started with the Walkmans, which were kind of cumbersome and not a lot of people trained with them too much. But now it's the iPods, and you go into the gyms and I remember when the music was playing in the gym, and we'd all kind of fight to see what they're going to play on the thing, or what kind of tunes they're going to play on the music system in the gym. But there was a camaraderie inside of that environment. Like everybody knew each other, and kind of, you had all the friendships and the rivalries and the competitors and all this sort of stuff. But there was like a whole subculture that was going on at that time that I don't see happening today in gyms. Most people are coming in, they got their headphones on, they're doing their workout, they got their little iPad or whatever, and that's it. Like there's that culture has seemed to be stripped out of that. Maybe it's online. I don't know. What's your take on that?
I absolutely agree, 100%. I don't know if we'll ever recapture that again, because it was indeed, I mean, every gym that I trained at early on, whether it was Future Man, there was another one called Ultimate Gym, and then my gym, Maximum Health and Fitness. There was always that cultural tribe type environment. And again, you said, there were friendships, there were rivalries, there were cliques, but it was always a connection in some way, shape, or form, right? Mm-hmm. When you worked out at 6 a.m. or 8 p.m. at night, it didn't matter. It was always the same guys, the same group. Yeah. It was always there, and you encourage each other, you spot each other. And it was also easy to find a good training partner, because at 6 a.m., there's another 5, 6, 10 guys. So you jump in once in a while with somebody else. They jump in with you, and all of a sudden it sparks this, hey, you know what? You're at 6. Let's do it. Let's train again tomorrow. And all of a sudden you had great training partners. You can't do that today. There's just no way. So yeah, I think there's a cultural a loss. And again, with every loss, there's also a benefit. With every door that closes, there's a window. And maybe in some way, shape, or form, there's some benefit to all this, personalization in terms of the headsets and disconnecting from everyone else within that particular community. But I'd be stretched to try and find what that benefit is, because there was such, a camaraderie that was happening in those days. And again, the noise, you could hear, you might have been a little, so they were playing certain music you didn't like, country music, or maybe you wanted classic rock, or maybe something like that. You know what I mean? I remember Future Man. It was always, it was like just the advent really of sort of not hip hop, but R&B. And Tony used to play a lot of R&B. So I've got like Earth, Wind, and Fire and all those, like that is anchored every day. That music was playing. And I was a rock guy, man. I worked at all the rock clubs. I was a bouncer, all that stuff. Yeah. But man, to this day, my wife's not a big fan of Earth, Wind, and Fire. I happen to love it because it's anchored to Future Man. And so you're right. I think we're losing that cultural aspect and the ability to connect. Nobody in gyms today, we don't smile at each other as much anymore. Yeah. We don't say hello as much anymore. We don't ask somebody. It's hard to even, you got to wait 10 minutes because somebody's got their headset on to ask for a spot if you need it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Somebody could be over in the corner, crushed under a bench press, and nobody would know.
Nobody would know. I know. Nobody would know.
Loss.
So, obviously you built an entrepreneurial career, and then your pro career happened. And then, so highlights of the pros, and then when did you decide that's enough of that? You're going to transit into, the next phase of your life?
Great question, because while I was, evolving in the entrepreneurial world, I was also competing as the pro at this point. And I competed. My first competition was the Night of the Champions.
Wow, that's a great. I mean, what an event! Your first show is the Night of Champions. Holy,
it was so cool. It was so cool because I'd been to the Night of Champions as a kid. You know what I mean? I was like, I saw Robbie Robinson and who was it? Danny Padilla, Mike Menser, Dennis Tenorino, all those guys competing on stage in the Beacon Theater in Manhattan. And and that's where it traditionally was always held. It was always held at the Beacon Theater. So my first year as a pro, not only did I get to compete, unfortunately I was 6th in the competition.
That's still really good in that show, because that's a tough show.
Yeah. Gary Stridham won. Mike Ashley was 2nd, who I'd beat the year before at the national championship. But the biggest kick I got out of being, and number one, it was my audience. It's New York. So I mean, and I already had the gym and everything. So like, there was a ton of
crowds there. Everybody's cheering.
Oh, it was so cool. It was so awesome. Embarrassing that I didn't win, but hey, listen, it is what it is. But I had a chance. The theme for that competition was like a Wild West town. So they had this whole Wild West village built, like the old, like storefronts and stuff on stage. And they had everyone, at the very beginning had cowboy hats on and stuff, they would do the posing thing. And not individually, but as a group, when the curtains open, there they were. And here I come riding out on a horse wearing a full Native American headdress, right? And I just got my posing trunks. I'm the only guy in the history of bodybuilding ever ride out on stage with a Native American headdress and on a horse.
That's awesome. That's so good. I love it.
There's a couple of distinctions in the bodybuilding career, and that's certainly one of them that I'm most proud of. It didn't matter that I didn't place. I could have went home right then and there, and it'd been a victory.
That's it.
So that didn't pan out. I was hoping, at that point, but I made some of the classic mistakes that bodybuilders and young athletes make along the way. It was like when I won the national championships, I weighed about 192 pounds. The light heavyweight division went up to 198. So I gave away a little bit of weight, and I could have competed as a pro at probably 198, 200 successfully, hard, lean, dry, and ready. Instead, I had to get on that stage at 215. And as a result, I was off. I thought, the pros, I got to be big. I got to be freaking big. Right. So trying to be big, I gave up my strength, which was the aesthetics, the lines, the separations, So it was a classic mistake, and I certainly didn't want to make it again. So it was the next year, I decided to compete in a show up in Niagara Falls, again, another New York show. And it was a pro show, and it was a Mr. Olympia qualifier. And so I took the drive up with my training partner, Ronnie Starantino, who's one of the best training partners I've ever had, great friends to this day. And we took the drive up, and sure enough, there's some great guys up there, Sonny Schmidt, there was a bunch of others, and I got to look at the guy who would ultimately win the show. His name was Albert Beckles. You and I have talked about Albert Beckles before. And Albert Beckles, even at the time, was about 55 years old. But he was one of the legends in bodybuilding. He had competed with Arnold and won the Mr. Universe, the Mr. World. He was from Barbados or somewhere. But, man, the guy was freaking good. And it was like, I looked at him, I was like, holy crap, this is going to be a battle. And sure enough, it was Sonny Albert Beckles took first. Sonny Schmidt, who was a great Samoan bodybuilder, passed away a couple of years ago.
He was a bare knuckle fighter as well.
Let me tell you, I did the Grand Prix tour in Europe with Sonny and all those other guys. And man, Sonny was a trip, man. I'll tell you a story about Sonny sometime. He was a blast, man. So I got to know him there that night of the champions, which, by the way, he spoke English, but you could never understand a word he said. You could never understand him, but you pretended like you did because he was so big. You had to pretend you understood what he was saying. You just laugh. Yeah, Sonny. So Sonny was second, and I was third, and that qualified me for the Mr. Olympia competition. And again, that was my main goal going into the thing. I knew I was up against tough competition. I know I'm not the biggest, but I recaptured the aesthetics, dropped my weight back down, tightened it up really good, and came in looking exactly as good as I could possibly look. And so that got me a third, qualified for the Mr. Olympia, which was in Rimini, Italy.
Right.
Very exciting. And that was only a few months later. So I had to hold that condition and try and re-peak again, which is never easy to do. But when you're pro, you got to do competition after competition after competition. It's a much more grueling process. Not as enjoyable as the amateur ranks, I don't believe. I had much more fun. And it was just a much more memorable experience training for those national championships than it was for the Mr. Olympia. So Rimini, Italy, which was like, I've never even been to Europe. So it was really quite the experience. And that was that one, I think you and I talked about it earlier, where I got up on that stage or even backstage in the pump-up room. And I felt like that 16-year-old kid. I'm looking around at all these incredible competitors. I'm at the Mr. Olympia, the pinnacle. I'm in the Super Bowl, And man, although I felt like I deserved to be there and I'd earned my stripes, it was an incredible experience just being there as that 16-year-old kid, man. It was amazing.
That's super amazing.
So needless to say, I unfortunately didn't win that competition, but it was a powerful lesson. And then I did what's called the Grand Prix tour. Are you familiar with the Grand Prix tour?
Yeah, that was like all these shows like back to back to back across Europe, which is just I can't even like having peaked for a bodybuilding show. I cannot comprehend doing shows back to back to back to back like every week.
It was grueling. And the reason I really wanted to go, number one, the press, you know, the magazines and all this stuff, you know, you need that as a pro. And you need it to help you make your living. And it would help bolster my gym as well. But I really wanted to test my mettle because I felt exactly the same way you do. I'm like, 7 contests in 2.5 weeks, traveling from this country, this country, this country, this country, this country, by bus. I'm like, I got to test my mettle on this thing, man. This is going to be something. And sure enough, it really was. It was a test of one's mettle. And it was, eating was tough. Sleeping was tough. You're on the bus for hours. They don't want to stop to let you go to the bathroom. It was, but it was also one of those experiences, Wade, where you bond with guys, and not every guy. I mean, you bond with every guy, but you develop friendships. So it was me on this tour, Sonny Schmidt, and Milos. You know who Milos Shoshev is?
Of course. Yeah,
it was me, Sonny, and Milos. We kind of connected. We kind of hung out, you know?
Right.
And so we were best buds where we sat together. We went out to eat. We did all stuff together. And Sonny was doing great. Sonny was second place to Vince Taylor for the first.
Who was another great poser, Vince Taylor?
Vince was great poser, man. And so he was second for 4 competitions. And then we were in Spain, and Sonny got us a hold of some illicit something or other that he was smoking, and he dropped from like 2nd to 5th to 6th to 8th to last in the last contest. He just went. He was like whatever he was doing, and he wound up eating and drinking too much water and stuff. It's just like he just like gave up.
Came on.
But it was an experience. And let me share one quick story with you.
Please.
Outside the competition, we were in Italy in some little village. Half these contests, I don't even know how they had brought all these bodybuilders. It's just like these small little villages, you know? So we're in this little village. I have no idea what the name of it was, but it was in Italy. And I remember there was no place to train. We hadn't trained in 2 days, you know? And it was just like, we're all sitting around in this big conference room. And like, somebody said, you know what? Let's go for a power walk, man. Let's do something, right? It was nice. That was beautiful. So all of us, every single one, in tank tops or no shirt, shorts, you know what I mean? We just like, so we get out and we're like, boom, boom, boom. We're power walking, and we're like on these back cobblestone streets. There's no one around, right? So I'll never forget, we're pounding through, right? And you can imagine like these Mr. Olympia competitors, right?
It's crazy.
And all of a sudden we're walking, all of a sudden there's like this group of kids. You can picture these Italian kids. They're all sitting, they got their feet up on the, and they're smoking their cigarettes. All of a sudden they're like, and I'm watching them watch us go by. And it must have been like they just saw something from another planet.
Sure.
And it's just like, there's like 12 of us, all muscular. And they were just like dumbfounded. I saw one kid drop a cigarette. What the hell? So I'll never forget that. I'm one of those people, I like to observe other people and human nature and see how they respond to environments and stuff. So it's always a kick for me to be able to watch that. And it was always fun to watch that because I realized what bodybuilders look like to the average person. Because I still had that image in my mind for Future Man when I saw Steve Mahalik, Mr. American. I was like, how is this possible?
Yeah.
So I can imagine 12 guys, you know? So it was a great experience, and it definitely tested my mettle. I was fortunate that I improved every competition. I got a little bit better, and I started placing a little bit higher each time. But it was still quite the challenge, man. But I'm so glad I did it. It was a great experience.
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others, is a total game changer. Suddenly, you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
So I know you did another Olympia and stuff, but at what point did you decide to say that was it, that like it's time to move on?
Well, that's a great question, and it's really pertinent to how our unconscious mind in many respects can ultimately lead us to where we need to go, whether we want to go or not. And sometimes leads us where we don't want to go, unless we direct it. And it was after the second Mr. Olympia competition, which was also a great experience. I did another Grand Prix tour that year. It was after that I decided to, I took a little bit of time off, not much, but I decided to move to Colorado. I had been doing a television show for Fox Sports Net at the time. And we were traveling all over the country, covering competitions and doing interviews and stuff. And I wound up in Colorado for the Mr. Colorado competition and just fell in love with Colorado. Absolutely fell in love with it. Not to mention that I met the woman that was going to be my wife at that competition. Her name was Dawn. And to this day, we've been together for well over 25 years now. So there was no turning back. I love Colorado. I fell in love with her almost overnight. And went back to New York, sold my gyms, and moved to Colorado. So long story short, I decided, I'm in Colorado. I'm taking a little bit of break from competition. I got to do some of the stuff that other people do, especially here in Colorado. People ski in Colorado. They mountain climb. They mountain bike. They do these things. And it's like, I've been bodybuilding. That's it. So I decided to get out and mountain bike. And I got the best mountain bike, the Cannondale, Shimano Shark, carbon fiber and the whole deal. And we're out for a ride coming down the hill. And I literally go over the bars and compound fracture my arm, break the clavicle, a couple of ribs.
Wow.
And so the reason I bring that up is, and tie it into how our mind, our unconscious mind can lead us down the road we should be going or want to go or have been vacillating on. Because I had been vacillating on after the second Olympia, not making the top 10, doing well in the Grand Prix, but not making the top 10 in the Olympia. I had to come to a realization. I had to say, hey, you know what is it going to take to make even just to make the top 10? How much further do I have to push my body? How much more calories, how much more workouts, how much more of the supplements, all that stuff began to weigh heavy. And it's just like, I started to come to the realization. And, even if I put on 20 pounds of muscle, I may or may not make the top 10. I'm not going to win this thing. And so, but I didn't like being in the biker community and the club and all that stuff. I'd love to say I had the courage to make the decision myself to get out. But again, it took a leap of faith, and it was my unconscious mind that led me down that path. I've been vacillating with it for a while since I moved to Colorado. And so when I went over those bars and broke the body, completely shattered it, it was the message from my unconscious mind that said, hey, you know what? If you're not going to make the decision you need to make to move on with your life and to move on to what's next, the next chapter, I'm going to make it for you. And it did. And as a result of that, there was very little chance of coming back. I thought about it. I reminisced about it. I even, visualized it. But then I saw Dorian Yates. And as you know, Dorian Yates had won the Olympia and went on to be one of the greatest Mr. Olympias ever. I saw him guest pose because I was still doing a television show. So I was doing commentary, and I saw him guest pose at a competition. And this was a few months after my arm broke, and I had lost 30 pounds. And I see Dorian And I was like, oh my God, he put on 25 or 30 pounds in that year.
I remember that they did the posters in Flex magazine where it was like, here he is last year. And then they did the black and white photo, and here he is at the top of the sport that just
it was unbelievable, wasn't it?
Like, what happened?
That's exactly what I asked myself. Like, what happened? How did this?
The sport actually changed in that moment.
It did.
Because we went away from the cuts, the separation, the what I call the classical physique, and it kind of ushered in the mass monsters. Like it was, and you know, everybody felt that they needed to add 20, 30, 40 pounds to their physique. Oh. And although they added it, a lot of guys added it, the quality of the physique went down in a lot of ways.
It was at a cost. There's no question about it. Dorian was probably... Again,
no disrespect to Dorian. I mean, he's an amazing individual, an incredible athlete, and mentally very, very tough and focused. And
absolutely, I love Dorian. I love Dorian, and to this day, he's still a great athlete. It changed his mindset around all that. He's much thinner. You can't even believe looking at him, he's the same guy, you know?
I know, it's kind of interesting. You see him in the interviews now. He's doing the circuit now, and he's had some amazing breakthroughs in his own life.
Right. I mean, I was never that big, so it's like it's not that dramatic. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not that dramatic. But for him, it was dramatic, you know?
Yeah.
But he did usher in that whole mass monster process, that whole change, that evolution that took place. But one of the things that Dorian was able to avoid to a great degree was what happened along the way, which was the distension of the abdomen. Yeah. A lot of bodybuilders began distending, and the abdomen started to become so thick, the muscles so thick, that it just distended. And there were some things going on internally in terms of the organs as well. And that became the new signature of the mass monster bodybuilders, this distended belly. Dorian certainly didn't have that, but everyone who followed, sort of like that's what was being represented in many respects. So for me, I knew number one, it's going to be tough putting in 30 pounds I already lost, but I'm going to put another 30 pounds on. So that facilitated the ultimate, not just the unconscious, but the conscious decision to retire and move on to the next chapter, you know. But I watched bodybuilding evolve along the way. And it's interesting because I've been asked, you know, what do you think? Are you disappointed? How would you change it? I'm like, the sport has to evolve. It's got to evolve. Yeah. I don't necessarily like the direction it's going, but what other direction is it going to go? I don't know. I think something we need to you pull the reins a little bit, but at the same time, it's always been about size. It's never not going to be about size. Yes. I mean, when I was training, even though I wasn't the biggest guy, my motto was bury me massive. I mean, it's just like, I had to get big. If you weren't training to get big, then why are you freaking training? You know what I mean? It didn't
make any sense, right?
Right? I mean, isn't that true? So how are we going to change that mindset that has turned these guys who are 5'3", 300 pounds and say, hey, you know what? You need to taper it down a little bit. Yeah. I don't know, man.
That's an interesting. So you went into, you left the career, and I think this is a really good segue because I know there's a lot of people right now that are in the current economic and health crisis happening globally. Yeah. A lot of people's livelihoods, a lot of people's what they thought or how things were going to play out in their lives or the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years has now been radically disrupted. And somehow you found an opportunity in what someone would say was a chaotic event. You crashed and, you know, essentially ending your career and causing that kind of rethink. And I think a lot of people are going through a rethink right now. How are you able to make that transition into your new career?
Well, I would already speak, you know, as a pro bodybuilder, I was touring occasionally, more than occasionally, frequently actually, doing seminars and guest posings. And you weren't always in great shape to do a guest posing, so I wouldn't do them, but I would do the seminars, you know? And seminars were always just about disseminating information, mindset training, the training itself, the diet, all that stuff, and whatever questions the audience would have. So I felt relatively proficient at disseminating information in front of groups and audiences. So I began doing more motivational stuff. The bodybuilding became, you know, part of that foundation, the experiences, the stories, but it was really more a different context. It was about motivating, incentivizing, and leading other people who want to be leaders and entrepreneurs and business owners for the most part. So I started doing that. And it was going pretty well. I was pretty successful at it. And then I got recruited by a big company called Peak Potentials. And maybe you've heard of it. I think you have.
Yeah.
It was led and created by a guy named
Harv Eker.
Harv Eker, you know?
Yep.
And he wrote The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind, which is interesting because I had read it. Actually, I listened to it first. And I listened to it. My wife and I listened to it a couple times, and it all made perfect sense. And it began to shed light on the mindset and the belief system around wealth and around money and around poverty and around, being worthy of any and all of that. And so it had an impact. And it wasn't long after that we went to one of the events here in Denver, Colorado, and they were looking for trainers because they were starting to go globally, and they were looking for trainers. I said, you know what? Let me give this a go. So it was a process, obviously, being accepted by Peak Potentials, and it was quite the process. I mean, it was probably as nerve-wracking or grueling as preparing for a competition because, I had to go and like more or less audition and give talks and trainings in front of their trainers and their groups and Harv himself. And it was like every time I went down to Arizona to do that, it was like 2 or 3 times, I was sick. I had the flu or something. I remember sitting in the back of the room, Harv's in the back there, and I'm just like hiding because I couldn't sleep the whole night. There's about 50 people that are auditioning, trying out. And I remember I fell asleep in the back of the room because I hadn't slept the night before. I had the flu. I was on Theraflu and all this stuff. All of a sudden I hear my name. I'm like, what? I was like, okay, now I got to get up on the stage and do my thing. Right. And it's like, oh my God, I'm dying. I'm sweating. And Harv did not make it easy on me, man. He beat me up. It was like unbelievable because I guess maybe like Bob Gruskin, he saw some potential, maybe that was in there that, hey, maybe this guy, we got a possible here, And so I would do something and he'd say, stop. Do that again, but this time I want you to do this. Or don't ask a question, give a directive. And it was like, this went on for like an hour. I was dying, man. I was freaking dying. But next round, I got through to the next round, like getting through the national championship. I was tested and got through the next round. And ultimately, it came down to, they brought on 4 guys to become lead trainers. And the next process was a year of training with them. And I had a great mentor, 2 guys, Aaron Huey and Rob Riopel, which were lead trainers.
I met Rob way back in the day.
Did you really?
I took Train the Trainer from him.
Train the Trainer?
Yeah, which selling from the stage, which literally made me millions of dollars, which I really appreciate.
What a great training. I'm telling you, take that training, the Train the Trainer, expand it over a year with like intensive experience in all of that. And that's what I went through for the next year, training to be a lead trainer for Peak Potentials, because everything they teach in Train the Trainer is what they use in their process.
Correct.
To get people into the room, to hold the energy of the room, how to keep people engaged for 3, 4, 5 days while they're going through this process. Mm-hmm. So everything they teach is what they actually utilize, which is really cool. So I went through that year process of learning that stuff until ultimately I was a lead trainer and actually taught alongside Rob Riopel, Train the Trainer in Singapore the first year they had it there, which was
wow. That's
really
what a small world. I can't believe all the connections here.
Oh yeah, it's crazy, man. So that took the speaking and training that I'd already been doing to a whole nother level, and opened up the doors, opened up my mind. It was while I was with Peak Potentials, I began writing my first book, The 7 Rules of Achievement, and then Why Smart Goals May Be Dumb, and launched that into my own speaking career, training career, and coaching career. And sort of that's where I am today, in that respects, and in hopes of still serving people on that level in many respects.
One quick question, and I think I'm curious because I felt this, but I'm curious on you. Do you feel that your career as a bodybuilder, being on stage in the most unforgiving lights, standing, as I say, standing in a marble bag in front of the most critical audience on the planet.
A marble bag, I love it.
Right? being there. Do you feel though that being able to present yourself without any form of communication, not allowed to open your mouth or talk or sing or anything else as a bodybuilder, it's all physical presence.
Right.
Do you feel that physical presence really helped you as a communicator on stage?
It's a great question and a great observation, because the fact is, absolutely, there's no question about it. And that ability to be able to communicate energetically. I mean, if you think about a mime, for example, to be able to communicate your message, your emotion, the context, whatever it might be, or the content, without being able to say anything, to be able to express it with your body. You have to be able to do that as a speaker as well. And I'm a very it's like, I gotta make sure I don't hit my mic and my water bottle.
Like, now they have those, which the greatest invention on stage was the wire for your head. I hate the mics. Give me that wire every time. Because I'm the same way, because as a bodybuilder, you're opening up, you're doing these things, right? But you're if you're not used to holding a mic, you're still talking. You're out here like this. And the mic's over there. Wait a minute. Oh, those headsets were the best. Yes. So to answer your question, no question about it. Just having that, again, a familiarity in front of an audience it helps eliminate some of that fear. We know that it's one of the things. I still get butterflies. I still get, like nervous. I've thrown up a couple times before speaking. So you still get that, but it eliminates a lot of, there's a familiarity. Been there. I've done this before. I can do it again. And just because the context has changed a little bit, it's still the same emotion in many respects. And it also helps because and you see some speakers and I understand. I mean, Brian Tracy, for example, if you see Brian Tracy speak, Brian doesn't move on the stage.
Yeah, he doesn't move. He stands like arms like this and doesn't move from the spot he's on, and he still somehow managed to have impact. By the way, we heard him curse one time on stage. We were dumbfounded. Like, what? Brian Tracy cursed on stage?
It never happens.
But I'm, because I was used to being on the stage, moving around, doing routines, communicating a story and a message, I communicate that same way on stage. Pause. Move, not a nervous back and forth, but a very deliberate sharing of the stage, utilizing the stage. So all that has helped as well. That doesn't mean someone who hasn't had that experience can't be absolutely masterful on the stage, but it does take practice. It does. And that's one of the things that I learned from Peak Potentials as well, because I got, when I was in that training, and I would have, what they would do is they would assign certain pieces. Like, here's this piece. You're going to do this piece today. And you're going to do this piece. You got to memorize it. You got to use your own language a little bit. You got to make it your own, but you're going to deliver this piece. And there was always critiquing going on. You know what I mean? It's just like, that piece shouldn't have taken more than 20 minutes. Why did it take 45 minutes? Or it was too long on this, or you inflected on that. You know what I mean? So, or you stood on this side of the stage where it was already anchored to the negative. You should have been over here on the positive side of the stage where it's anchored to the positive. So it's like this constant feedback. So the reason I bring that up is because even if someone doesn't have an athletic or bodybuilding background where they're used to and comfortable being on the stage, it still requires, if you want to be masterful at it, still requires practice, understanding the psychology of the audience and what the messages you're trying to deliver and how to utilize the stage. Or you could just do what Brian Tracy does, because he manages to do it pretty successfully.
You make a great point. So tell me about your career as it is from that point forward. Like, what are you doing today, and what's got you jazzed up? Because you're obviously, you got a lot of passion, a lot of vitality. What's going on for Tom these days?
Well, really, what I'm immersed in is my coaching process, and I do several masterminds a year, basically about 3. They could be anywhere between 3 months and 6 months, depending on the group that I'm working with. And it's never more than 10 people. So I have this group, and it's really sort of a hybrid between a mastermind, which is generally, in many respects, has facilitator, but a lot of times it's led by the group itself in many respects, right? And of course, masterminds have some great components as well. And then a coaching, which is led by an individual or a mentor. and lead you through particular processes or your own processes, keep you accountable. So I've created a bit of a hybrid in that respect, where we have leadership through the group itself, because there's so many lessons in taking leadership. Range yourself. There's lessons in following. But I've combined the two in many respects. As I step in, I do a lot of coaching, a lot of mentoring. I take them through a specific process I call Experience the Leap. And the Experience the Leap process, interestingly enough, was something that I like to take credit for developing it. And ultimately, I did develop it, but it was something that was revealed to me, my wife, and my partner, Aaron. I mentioned Aaron Huey earlier. He was also a master trainer and still is with Peak Potentials. And we ventured off on a process on our own, a venture on our own. And we decided, okay, we said, what do we want to do? What creates change in people's lives? And what was your greatest change in your experience? And almost every time we said, there's a leap of faith involved. There's always a leap of faith involved. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what's the process? If leap of faith, it has to be a process, right? So it was revealed to us when we began to open ourselves up to what is the process of taking a leap of faith. So in many respects, that's what I teach, the process along the way. And it's a 4-step process. So I teach all those different processes, but then I let the group in many respects lead themselves through their process. We provide feedback, right, through a feedback loop and coaching along the way. And over the course of 6 months, they master this experience leap process so that they can put that into place, put it into action in whatever it is they want to change in their lives, whatever it is they want to manifest in their lives. So I'm really immersed in that. That's what I do. That's what I love to do. And like I said, we're going to take on about 10 people every 6 months or so to do this. And along with that, I'm still writing. I do a lot of social media. I've just written the book that I just wrote. Interestingly enough, that I launched on social media just the other day, the 7-step comeback process, is slated for publishing later this year. And slated for publishing later this year might mean next year or even the year after.
Right, with the current situation.
You know how it works, right?
Yeah, yep.
So I recognized, I said, hey, there's some tools, rules, and strategies in this thing that need to be out there today, not tomorrow, not next year. So I had a little bit of a battle with my publisher on this, but we changed the name, contextualized it a little bit, tightened it up a little bit, lost some of the stories and went from 250 pages to 50 pages so that it's very direct and it's very action oriented. And we were able to get it out there immediately and start giving it away to people so that they can use this. As you mentioned, this has been a disruption for all of us. For my wife and I, the biggest hit was financially in many respects. People are pulling back from doing masterminds, from doing coaching right now because they're uncertain, they're insecure, they're feeling a lot of stress right now because of those things. And you and I both know the fastest way to get out of feeling a sense of doubt, uncertainty, fear, stress is to create a plan and to begin taking action on that plan. Because it's no different than stepping on stage in front of a group of people or, with the marble hammock, whatever you're naked to the world, that if that's all you've got and you're just throwing it out there, it's pretty freaking scary, man. And there's a lot of doubt and uncertainty around it. But if you've created a plan, if you know exactly what this step looks like, this step looks like, this step looks like, and you begin taking action with the ability to pivot along the way, change a little bit if you have to, but having that plan eliminates that fear, that doubt, and that uncertainty. And that's my goal. That's my objective, to help people do that right now and to help them get out of those negative states and back into action so that they can start creating whatever the comeback is that they want, or whatever the change that they want as they move forward. I like to say, hey, instead of saying, be ready for what's next, I like to say, why don't you decide what's next?
Very powerful statement with that. I think right now, a lot of us are experiencing this virtually nonstop plethora of I would say conflicting information.
Yes.
Okay. Conflicting information. Is this a bioweapon? Is this a hoax? is this a liberal plot? Is it a conservative plot? Is it is it fake? Is it real? Is it going to be with us forever? Is it going to wash past? Is it, or you do it like, there is just, I've never seen a bigger mosh pit of information. And one of the things I've been doing on my Facebook page is I've been inviting questions. I've been saying, hey, here's a perspective. I'd like to see what people go, and you get it. You get all, you get everything, and everything's perspective. But there's an old saying about, analysis paralysis. And I think a lot of people haven't yet embraced the opportunity of the moment. So crisis and opportunity are always written together in the Kaishu script from Asia, which is a culture that's been around for at least 6,000 years. Or danger and opportunity. And these are dangerous times, or they're crisis times. And as everybody faces in life, whether it's this or something else, they're going to have that crisis moment. That moment when what they're currently doing, they know is no longer serving them, or can't serve them, or isn't going to work because of some life change. How do you take a person from that analysis paralysis? I don't know what to do. I'm feeling the fear, the anxiety. How do you jump them into that process? Like you say, okay, well, you make a plan, you execute the plan. Well, that sounds great. Mike Tyson says, well, everybody's got a plan until someone punches you in the face.
so true, man.
So obviously, because you're offering coaching here through this process, it's not as simple as writing down a plan and executing. What are the things that you've observed that keeps people stuck without making a decision, which is a form of a decision?
Yes, it is. Absolutely right. Yep. But the key is really the first step. And this is where most people either decide not to, or can't, or don't have the direction, or prefer to stay confused, or in a fog in many respects, because it means not having to act. And there's a lot of people out there that just would rather float with the whatever the particular tide is. So the first step, and this is indeed part of the 7-step process, but the first step, and I'll give you an example before I even share. When my wife and I, because at first we were the same thing, we were all confused. This is the plot. What's going on? What's really going on? But we had to come to the realization, and as soon as we came to the realization of the impact this was not only going to have, but is having on our business. I mean, almost 90% of our income just went away. Can we survive it for the moment? Sure. But we had to come to the realization that if this goes on any longer, we might lose our business. We might even lose our homes. We might have to start over. We had to start looking at that possibility. So the decision we made, and this is where a lot of people vacillate, because they don't necessarily want to make a decision, because a decision is empowering, but it also gives you a course of action. Once you make a decision, you got to take some action on this, and you got to stop vacillating. So the decision we made was, number one, this will not break us. Number two, we will thrive, because we knew there were opportunities. The problem is, initially, because all we could see was the problem, we were focused on the problem. We were focused on the challenge. We were focused on the disruption. We were blinded to the opportunities. Absolutely blinded. In fact, we were even at some point, and this is stuff we teach, but we even refused to believe that what opportunities? What? We're barely going to survive this thing. That's the mindset that keeps people from seeing the opportunities. So as soon as we made that empowering decision, number one, this will not break us. Even if we lose our business, we lose our home, we have to start all over. So what? It will not break us. We can survive this. It's not a problem. And then we said, we will thrive. So it was, in many respects, what motivates us on a human level, right? Which is the away from, the pain. It will not destroy us. We're avoiding pain. The pleasure was, we will thrive in this environment. We will see the opportunities, and we will take advantage of those opportunities. So the first step is to make a decision. I think a lot of people are still on the fence. They're vacillating. What's my decision? What am I going to do around this thing? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And you can even tell people, make a decision. Just make a freaking decision. Are you going to be taken down? Are you a victim by this thing? Or are you going to survive and thrive? Make a decision. There's still, no matter what, there's still going to be people that just, yeah, but how do I not focus on this threat? And some of the worst advice I ever gave somebody in my coaching process years and years and years ago, we turned it around. She became a very successful internet marketer. But some of the worst advice I ever gave someone was, listen, if you keep focusing on the possible detrimental outcomes or what could go wrong, you're liable to create that. You're liable to manifest that in your life. That's the worst advice I've ever. You can't tell someone who's in crisis how bad being in crisis is for you. Instead, what we did was I finally realized that, and we started to focus on the outcome we wanted. So if you're still focused on the uncertainty, the doubt, and all the fears, and you don't want to make a decision about how you're going to ultimately respond to this thing, then that's what you're going to focus on. That's what you continue to focus on. The only way to change that is to give yourself something else to focus on. When I realized what was happening and how this was going to impact our business, I saw the opportunity. Once we made that decision, I saw the opportunity. I said, hey, you know what? We've got this book here. This outlines a strategy for achieving something, for creating a plan, no matter what it is. And I couldn't write a strategic plan for every person out there. Everyone's got their individual.
Right. But the principles are universal.
Absolutely. So you can use that. So I said, so then shifted the focus from how are we going to survive this thing, right? To it will not break us and we will thrive. Suddenly the opportunity appeared. And it was just like, let's convert what we have in terms of this book that's going to be published. Let's turn it into something we can get out there immediately. Number one, we can benefit, but more importantly, we can help others benefit from it as well. So to answer your question directly, it's a decision. You have to make a decision. You know, the worst thing you can do is sit on the fence. I don't know if I should do this. I don't know if I should do that. Maybe I should wait for my job to reappear, or maybe I should start thinking about another career. I've been wanting to write that book, but what if I have to go back to work tomorrow? It's all this uncertainty around the decision. Make a freaking decision. If you decide you're going to write your book, and the thing that's going to interrupt that ever happening is going back to work for the same company you worked for yesterday, don't go back to work. Find another way. There's always another way. But if you make that decision, it is empowering. Next, you need the plan. But you got to make that decision first.
Yeah, it's so true. It's almost like your brain doesn't get activated onto the plan until you actually commit to it.
That's exactly it. And
you know, it's because you're kind of hanging. It's like your psychology is still running the numbers on the old plan.
Yes.
And so you don't have your full capacities to kind of go for what the new plan or what the possibility is, because people are playing defense. And I think it's very easy to get stuck into this defensive mode right now. But the opportunities are in the offense of what can I do given the circumstances? And the other piece is, what am I willing to let go of?
Yeah.
And
you're right about that.
So when you're going through the planning stage or whatever, and I don't want to give away all the book ideas or whatever, but what comes next in this sequence for people?
Well, actually, it's the big picture. It's the decision, then the big picture, because it is difficult, and you can relate to this. It's difficult in times of disruption and still a little uncertainty. Now, is there going to still be uncertainty associated with moving forward? Absolutely. Even though you've made a decision, there's still going to be some uncertainty, some doubt, and maybe some lingering fear. We haven't gotten far enough into the process yet to eliminate all those things completely. So in that state, in that mindset, it's difficult to be specific with your outcome.
Right.
At the end of this year, and by December 31st, I'm going to have $2.5 million in the bank. It's a very specific outcome. Could you create that? Is that realistic for some people? Absolutely, no question about it. You may be close already. But getting that specific is difficult. There's parts of our brains that will block that in many respects. So what we need to do is just get a grasp on the big picture, And for most people, certainly understanding, recognizing, and knowing what they don't want is a great roundabout way to figure out what they do want, right? I don't want to feel lonely anymore. I don't want to feel disempowered anymore. I don't want to feel fat anymore. Whatever it might be that can help us get some clarity. Okay, so what's the opposite? What as a result, if you don't want to be fat, what do you want to be? I want to be lean and sexy. I don't want to be broke. I want to feel a sense of abundance. I want to feel secure in my finances. Okay, good. So maybe that begins the foundation of the big picture. The big picture might look like, by the end of this year, in 6 months, I live in a wonderful home. I feel a sense of abundance in my finances. I'm living with a great mate who loves me and I love back. I'm in physically fit shape. Again, each one of those things can be broken down in the specific in terms of what is being physically fit and in good shape look like. What is that? How is that? How would we measure that? That could be done. But the big picture is one of or all of those things. So that's really the next step, the decision, and then getting a grasp of the big picture. We're all in this mindset. Like you said, we're playing defense right now. So playing defense gives us a pretty good idea of what we don't want. We got an idea. It's like, I don't want to be freaking broke. I don't want to have to worry. I don't want to have to worry about this happening again and me losing my home or losing my livelihood or not being able to feed my family. It's a great defensive position. So what's the opposite of that? And that gives you a better grasp of the big picture from there. So that would really be the next step.
And then you can go really quick because I'm going to encourage everybody to kind of you're actually giving this book away, which is pretty easy to download. Yeah. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then from there, you talk about accountability and I guess there's a process of probably revisiting that big picture over and over again as your course adjusting, because you get into the weeds of it. And sometimes that if you're not re-anchoring that vision again, you can get lost.
Yeah. And along the way during this process, what happens is you continue to anchor it. You begin to create, because there are so many, in the 7-step process, there are so many exercises. This isn't just about me philosophizing or sharing a strategy or even telling you something you may already know intuitively and maybe even used intuitively before or even consciously before. But rather, there are steps along the way that require contemplation, thought, reflection, even evaluation of where you are in the moment compared to where you were a few short months ago or even a few short weeks ago. So as you go through this process, you begin to clarify, you begin to hone the vision. The big picture starts to become maybe even a little bit more narrow in many respects in terms of how you define that, because you're going to discover that along the way. And ultimately, at the very end, you're going to create a clear image of exactly what that looks like. And then you're going to take action on it every step of the way. So you're absolutely right. The big picture is one thing, but it's the big picture helps you create at least something to program that internal success mechanism, as Maxwell Maltz in cybernetics would have called it, the internal navigation, the cybernetic system to start you moving. It's the only way, the big picture is the only way to begin that, and the decision to begin taking your focus off what you and I both, we're constantly, quite frankly, I've had enough. I've had enough with the commercials around it. I've had enough with the masks. I've had enough with all of it. And it's like, we're constantly freaking inundated with it. And it's like fear and uncertainty being shoved down our throats, man.
Yep.
So how do we not pay attention to that unless we've got something else to pay attention to? And the big picture, the broad picture right now is what we should start paying attention to. That and the commitment to our decision. The process along the way of creating that plan further and further along solidifies that image and even starts to bring it into focus, you might say, along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally, 100%. And then, of course, obviously there needs to be accountability and of course, adjustments as you go around, because you start out with the plan and then you have to retweak the plan and retweak the plan, right? Because nobody can kind of or almost no one can actually just say, oh, I'm going to do this and know specifically what those steps you're going to come up with, essentially,
Yes.
which is, that's not a bad thing. So how do you manage moving towards your goal, even though you're going to have to make these course corrections along the way?
Well, being prepared. Number one, knowing in advance that this is going to happen. I mean, my plan for 15 years was to become Mr. America, ultimately compete as a pro bodybuilder. And I ran up against a disruption in the form of a 30-mile-an-hour crash off a mountain bike. I mean, it completely disrupted my world. And at first, I was shocked. Like many of us, we're a little dumbfounded, we're a little confused, we're a little uncertain, we don't know. If I'm not this 250-pound bodybuilder, who am I? What am I going to do? I was shocked by that. And so part of that process, and again, is knowing that even with a plan, you have to know that you're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to adjust your course a little bit along the way. And one of the components in the planning process is knowing what resources you have and what resources you'll ultimately need. Because we all have resources, internal and external, right? Intrinsic and extrinsic. We have resources. Going back to the bodybuilding real quick in context of the resources that we need, my third year competing in that national championship, I knew, and you know this way, 3 times, you could either strike, 3 times you're either out or you can create tremendous momentum. And it was like, I was butting up against you're out. 12 weeks out from the contest, I felt confused, lost. I couldn't pull it together, man. Just mentally and emotionally, physically, I was working out, but it just wasn't happening, And I remembered a resource that I hadn't spoken to in over a year, maybe more. And that was Tony Pandolfo, the guy who owned that first gym. He was one of my early mentors. And I remember calling him. I remember at the peak of my frustration, why can't I get this freaking together? This is the year I either win or that's it. I lose my momentum. And so I called him out of the blue, out of nowhere. Because I recognized him as a resource. And I said, Tony, you know my situation. Third, second. It's either now or maybe never. I said, what am I going to do? And he said, be in the gym at 6 a.m. tomorrow and be ready. That was it. That gave birth to some incredibly painful, memorable workouts, but it also gave birth to winning a national bodybuilding championship. So what I had to do was recognize, number one, I needed help. Number two, to be able to provide that help, what's the resource? Is there something I can draw from inside? There's an experience. We talked about anchoring. I hope you've anchored some of your successes along the way, because now you can draw from them, possibly help you through this thing to pivot and shift and do whatever's necessary. Or maybe you have to connect with someone. Maybe you'd have to look at your resources outside yourself. Who's there? And many times reaching out to a resource that you have and utilize, if it's an individual, for example, reach out and ask how you can help them. You'd be surprised at how much help you'll receive in return. So maybe you're feeling stuck, or maybe you're feeling frustrated, or you know what, the plan isn't coming together exactly as I anticipated it. What are the resources? So I have you do this in advance as far as an exercise. As far as, okay, let's anticipate 3, 6, 12 months down the road. What are some of the obstacles we know you're going to run into? We know it. Okay, so you've decided you're not going to go back to your job. You want to become a personal trainer instead. Fantastic, great career. You can really impact people's lives. You can make some money, and you can really do something that matters, So what are you going to need along the way? You can't just jump in and become a personal trainer. You're probably going to need a certification. To do that, what are you going to need? So we start to look at the details of that in terms of what resources will you need. Do you know someone? Do you know someone who's been a personal trainer? What was their experience like? Gain some information from them. Interview them. Get some knowledge. Reach out to those people, to your outside resources. So I have people go through the exercise where we make a list of what resources you know you're going to need along the way, and what resources might you need along the way, and then what resources do you have internally and externally. And this helps along the way when we run into those challenges, those hurdles, those obstacles, those landmines that we may or may not expect. Sometimes you can expect them. But even if you don't, you've got resources that you can reach out to, internally or externally, that you now know, no matter what, you can get. In peak potentials, we used to say over, under, around, or through. whatever it takes, you will get through. So you can always find a resource to help you do that. Hope that answers that question. I think I don't remember what the question was.
No, that was really beautiful. And I think one caveat I think is when you go back to that gym kind of metaphor, you showed up and handled the things that you could control, and were willing to go through, as you said, the pain, the transformation, the metamorphosis, because you're breaking a pattern. Essentially, you're breaking a way of thinking. Like 95% of our thoughts the same, our habitual patterns, our habitual routines, and our habitual stuff kind of create our life. And when that's all been disrupted, there's this area that everybody's been disrupted. We're in this, what do I do with myself? How I interact with my partner is different. How I interact with my job is different. How do I interact with, I can't go to the gym anymore. I can't do anything. So being able to pivot in that moment and then embrace this as a new challenge, I think is kind of the recipe for success. Is like, okay, let's hold this thing in mind and let's go.
You're right, Don. I want to touch base on that because, again, being able to understand and embracing this new challenge is a key. And it really all begins with mindset. And you can cultivate the mindset you need to be able to be successful in almost anything. And I believe, we can call it the growth mindset. And I believe the growth mindset is almost like, it's basically like 3 different mindsets working in conjunction with each other. And the first, of course, is the beginner's mindset. And the beginner's mindset is the mindset I had when I walked into Future Man Gym. And I asked myself, how is that possible?
Right.
I never doubted that it was possible. I just said, how is that possible? Beginner's mindset embraces new things and comes from not knowing like, well, I was this and I know that, you know what I mean? So freaking what? You knew this, you know that, you've done that. Now we're here now. This is a new challenge. Let's take it on like a beginner would, because a beginner would approach this thing like, okay, how? What do I need to do? It wouldn't be like, well, I'm this or that, or comes in with some kind of fixed mindset that would actually block them from accepting that this is a new challenge. This is something I've got to, accept and take on. So that's one of the mindset, is that beginner's mindset. The second is a focused, directed mindset, because the mindset of being lost and confused is not going to cut it. It's just not. And so you have to direct your own focus. We talked about this earlier. So it's the directed, focused mindset that we have to cultivate and create. And the third is the flexible mindset. We've got to be flexible. And this is such a key right now, that in NLP, and you've studied NLP, we touched base on it just briefly a little while ago. There's a, what do we call it? The presupposition, and what's it called? The law of requisite variety. And the law of requisite variety is basically the most flexible rules the roost. That if you've got flexibility in the system or in the body or in your mindset, and you're able to go with the flow, bend with what's happening, and accept that there are changes taking place, you've got a much greater likelihood of not only surviving, but thriving in that environment. The most rigid mindsets along the way can't bend and flex. A rigid mindset in these circumstances might be someone, and this is just one example, hope no one is offended, but a rigid mindset in this particular circumstance might be, it's like, hey, you know what? The medical community knows what they're doing. They have all the answers. If they tell us not to go out, they tell us to wear masks, this is what we need to do. We can't question that.
Yes.
That's a rigid mindset that keeps you from exploring other options, other ways. They may or may not have all the answers, but if you're rigid in that respect, that they have all the answers, you're not going to be flexible enough to be able to see or experience any other alternatives or possible remedies to whatever your situation might be. So those 3 things are key.
That deference to an outside authority who can't possibly know all the parameters, and this is a great example, and no disrespect to anybody in the medical community, but they are approaching this situation from a medical construct of what they think is best. These people are not economists. They don't understand the impact economically that's going back. And I think to Charles Darwin, who I believe is one of the most misquoted people ever. And it's not survival of the fittest. It was survival of the most adaptable.
Adaptable.
So we assumed that fittest was adaptability. Somehow that got mixed up and that meme propagated around the world. The species that have thrived throughout nature are those species that adapt to the ever-changing conditions of life on this planet. And I encourage people to recognize, we didn't go back to normal after 9/11. We're not going back to normal after this. The question is, how are you going to adapt? What are the decisions that you're going to make? What are the resources you're going to pull from? What are the opportunities that are coming out from this moment, this time that we're living in? And then how are you going to help people? Like who are you going to contact, or what are you going to contact, or who are you going to reach out to that's going to help you get past the monkey mind of living in the past or trying to get back to the past, as opposed to accepting radical acceptance. This is the new world. A lot of people are going to die. Economies are going to be wiped out. Your career might be over. Your business might be over. Your job might be over. Okay. Is that the end of the world? No. Is that the end of how your world was? Yes. So what kind of world are you going to make from this? Accept the worst case scenario. It's all going out the window. It's all going to be done.
Right. I like that. You're absolutely right about that. We have to be able to accept that things change.
Accept it. What's next?
Yeah. And then decide what's next. And again, be prepared, but also make a decision around it.
And then I would also like to invite people to go back in time to some major crises in life that you thought were absolutely terrible, absolutely devastating. And then how 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, you looked at that and go, wow, you know what? That was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I know I recognize that from my bodybuilding career. I recognize it from my business career, that some of the biggest travesties and the biggest failures and the biggest letdowns and the most horrific things happen was the universe kind of pushing me in a new direction, in a new way that invited an undreamed of possibility. And, think about my own journey. Here we are. I remember when I was a kid looking in magazines, and there you were posing on stage. And I was going, wow, I would love to look like that. I'd like to be like that. I could be that way. And now, decades later, we're sitting using digital technology that didn't exist, having a conversation about how you've presented the book for people, a pathway, a coaching opportunity where they can learn specifically, download this book for free. They can find out about it and say, hey, look, it's time for the comeback. It's time to make a change in your life. It's time to put some principles into your life that is someone who's achieved at a very high level in different areas of your life and help other people do this, to come forward and say, hey, guess what? I got the strategy. I got the plan. This is how you go about it. These are the questions you ask. And what a great service. So how do people find out about us? Where do they get the download of the books? We want to put the links in here. I want to connect you. You've been so gracious with your time. We've been on here for 2 hours. It's flown by.
No, we haven't. It's
2 hours will go by. It's amazing. I could spend another 10 and trade stories with you.
I do too, man.
But the bottom line is how do they get a hold of you? How to get a hold of this book? And any last words that you'd like to get in? Please share how to get a hold of you, what you do, and the whole 9 yards. The floor is yours. I'm going to shut up and have at it.
Well, first I need to say that it's been such a pleasure, Wade. It's just so enjoyable to chat with someone with your level of knowledge, experience, mindset, with the bodybuilding background to share and to be able to tie that in. One of the things that I love about, having this camaraderie with fellow athletes and bodybuilders is that, especially now at this age, and with our experience behind us, we can start to really put it together and think about how that served us in many respects, how it serves others, the mindsets and the things that we learn from the sport that have carried us forward and made us successful in other areas of our life. And I love to see that, So thank you so much for sharing this opportunity with me and giving me an opportunity to share what I've experienced and what I've learned along the way, and the rules and the strategies and the tools with your listeners and your audience as well. So I really want, I'm honored by that, and have really truly, I can't believe it's 2 hours. And like you said, I could go on for quite a bit longer. I just finished my coffee, so the caffeine's going to wear off pretty soon. But so with that said, you can find the book. It's very simple. thecomebackplan.com. thecomebackplan.com. In fact, we're doing a webinar. There's a free webinar as well, a follow-up. We're going to talk more about the strategies specifically and expand upon them in many respects. But I would suggest downloading the book, reading the book first. But more than anything else, guys, don't just read the book. Go through the exercises. This is one of the things Wade and I both learned along the way. I can't tell you how many books I read that never did the exercises. I learned a few things. I was able to quote a couple of things that were cool, but never really embodied it. It never really changed my mindset in many respects. It alerted me changes that needed or were required, but it never really happened. The exercises are how it happens along the way. So do the exercises, and go through the process of doing that, and then join us on the webinar so we can take it to the next level. The last thing I want to say is that, you know, no matter what anyone has accomplished, Wade, myself, anyone you know, anyone on the highest level, anyone you admire, respect, and look up to, you can achieve every bit as much. You have the potential. And I would, again, we talked about opportunities here. The opportunity here is to not necessarily go back. You know, if you're looking just to go back to life the way it was, the way it was before, and back to normal, there were things you weren't happy with about in your life. There were things that you could have achieved more, things that you wanted to do. This is the opportunity to do that, to write that book, to create that music, to create a following on Facebook, to do a blog, whatever it might be for you. This is the opportunity to do that. We've been disrupted. We've had the cage rattled, you might say. And once that cage has been rattled, you can't go back. Because even if life goes back completely as it was, you will never be the same. You'll always want more. It's been rattled, and you'll be disappointed. You'll be frustrated. You'll be angry with yourself if you don't take this opportunity. And it starts with making that first decision. What does this mean to you, and how will you follow forward with it? And number two, get a big picture in your mind. Take your focus off the negativity. Start focusing on something that's positive and the things that will begin to change your life along the way. And then 6 months from now, you'll be able to pat yourself on the back and say, I freaking did that. I not only survived it, but I thrived. I created something, and I served someone along the way. I'm here to serve you as well. I hope you'll download that book, and maybe if you and I are lucky, we'll connect on a higher level, and maybe even go through some coaching together. But for now, that's enough. And God bless you. Be safe, be healthy, and put your faith in yourself and God, and maybe your surroundings, but not necessarily in the rest of the world. Have faith.
Beautifully said, Tom. You've been such a great guest. You're such an inspiration. Thank you so much. I hope we get to connect again soon as one of this whole lockdown craziness gets over with. Folks, that's it. This is the Awesome Health Podcast. It's been a barn burner, bodybuilding to the corona crisis, but more importantly, how you turn this current situation into the comeback of your life. Thank you, Tom, for joining us today, presenting this incredible opportunity. And I do hope we get to connect again really soon. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This is the Awesome Health Podcast from Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers. We'll see you next time. Take care.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. How to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.